This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on 8 years of hassle-free credit access under PM MUDRA scheme. The participants are Puneet Jain, Economic Analyst, and Rajesh Lake, AIR Correspondent.
As we celebrate the 7th anniversary of providing financial inclusion through the pillars of Pradhan Mantri MUDRA Yojana, Puneet, we would like to understand from you about the MUDRA Yojana.
Rajesh, exactly 8 years back, Prime Minister unveiled this vision of reaching to the farthest corners of Indian economy, people at the real margins of the economy, to enable them to get credit for the small and micro businesses. Some businesses are very, very small, so they can get access to credit and money to run their businesses. So this scheme was called a MUDRA Yojana. Basically, a company was floated by the name of Micro Unit Development and Refinance Agency. That is the name MUDRA came, which was funding the unfunded. Basically, people who are engaged in very small enterprises, you can say, small shops, tea shops, selling things on their, from temporary establishments, or workers working in handloom units or textile units, they were able to access funds up to 10 lakhs, but there are three categories of disbursements and with minimal documentation. So basically, until now, people who wanted to borrow small sums of money for the small businesses, they were scared of going to banks because they had to produce a lot of documents. Primarily, there was issue about security. So they had to provide a collateral for those loans, which was a big hindrance. And therefore, the smaller people with smaller resources, they could not access financial funds for their businesses. So, cornerstone of MUDRA Yojana is that people with small businesses can access loans without providing any collateral. And the process of accessing these loans is also very simple. One has to go online. There's a website, udyamimitra.com. You register on that website, you fill in the details and provide basic documents like ID cards, permanent address, and a basic business description. And then automatically the loans from various banks or NBFCs, they're offered to you and you can accept whatever offers are meant for you. So I think the process, first of all, is very simple. Secondly, these loans are given to those people who until now had no access to funding. So I think that is the chief bit of the scheme.
So what you say, I'm sure I'm not wrong in saying that the Pradhan Mantri MUDRA Yojana stands for Social Justice in Action and embodies the true spirit of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas.
Yes, in fact, I was wondering that when the Prime Minister unveiled his integrated vision for digital economy, for UPI, for Jan Dhan accounts, for JAM, I think this was a very comprehensive plan to take the benefits of economic development to the last person in the country. To those sections of society who do not live in big cities or who do not have access to resources, to take those benefits to people living in villages and particularly marginalized section of society. Because if you look at the MUDRA scheme, the data that we have got, in fact, as of today, is that in last 8 years, 40 crore accounts have been disbursed 24 lakh crores by government banks. Secondly, 85% of these loans were small loans, less than 50,000 per loan, and 70% of beneficiaries are women. So you can see that the targeting is such in the loans that women in running small businesses in villages have benefited to the largest extent, to the extent of 85% of the loans, which is roughly, you can say, almost 17-18 lakh crores. So you can imagine the kind of employment which would have been generated by these loans, the kind of benefits which have gone to all sections of society. So you are right. I mean, this is how we take development to every corner of the country.
And the figures that I have with me, Puneet, says that more than 34.42 crore loan accounts amounting to roughly about 18.60 lakh crores opened since the launch of Pradhan Mantri MUDRA Yojana. And the primary beneficiaries were those who were credit-starved and aspirational districts. So therefore, people, those who have had nothing to look forward to, at least this MUDRA Yojana gives them a ray of hope.
Absolutely. See, the whole design of the scheme, I'm saying this with a lot of responsibility because usually we would have schemes announced by government and we would be skeptical that how would this be effective? Will it really reach to the people that it targets? This scheme has been targeted for the benefit of people living in very small villages or towns who have practically no access to formal financial framework. So, and therefore they were not able to get the kind of credit support that they needed for the survival or for their progress in, let's say, villages. So everybody would obviously run towards larger cities or larger towns to find a living, to survive. Mudra Yojana, by its very design, because if you see the average loan size is about 60,000 rupees per person. So that kind of money can be used only in smaller towns or villages to run small shops or small workshops, to provide services, to do some manufacturing. So that was one great benefit of the scheme, that it reached out to people who actually needed that support. Secondly, as we just discussed, 70% of beneficiaries are women. So basically women in villages who can create economic value, they benefited. And thirdly, I think the great achievement about this scheme in days to come we will see is how we integrate the rural and the semi-urban economy with the mainstream. See, we have this large corporate economy which generates about $3 trillion. But 50-60% of this actually comes from our villages and our towns. So we need to integrate this entire economic system to get the biggest benefits for all the people of the country. So I think Mudra scheme actually integrates the rural economy with the larger economy.
So I also heard you say a while back about the employment opportunities that the scheme has opened up. Would you elaborate a bit more on that?
So Rajesh, as we know, I would go back to the way the scheme has been implemented and thought through. See, 40 crore accounts have benefited from these loans. And most of these accounts, and there are many stories on the internet, and you can go through those incidents which I mentioned, that somebody who was working as a worker in a textile unit, worker in handloom unit, they have become owners of small businesses. Women running small tea shops, they started running bigger stores. And all this in villages. Somebody running a cycle rickshaw, he became an owner of and started working for himself. So a lot of people, and we know that in India, 70% of the GDP actually comes from small, medium enterprises and family-run businesses. So that is how the employment opportunity has to be harvested. We need to employ more people. We have seen sometimes, I would say this grounds against big businesses that they have jobless economic growth. No, the economy grows, but jobs don't grow. But when we fund the smaller businesses, we fund enterprises in villages, smaller towns, so-called entrepreneurial spirit of the country, that is how employment is generated. And Mudra scheme plays an extremely important role in encouraging employment at the grassroots level. So 40 crore businesses which would have been supported by this scheme, they would have automatically led to huge employment generation at all levels.
So as I understand you saying that the noteworthy focus of PMMY has been to able to extend credit to growing number of beneficiaries from the aspirational districts which have been identified by the Niti Aayog, and thus enabling flow of credit to these credit-starved districts. In return, we are talking about financial inclusion. So if you could elaborate on that.
So in fact, again, when we see big economic strides or large economies, that is true not only for India. It is true across the world. Whenever we have seen economies making big strides, growing rapidly, we find that certain sections of society which do not have access to those formal channels of credit or formal channels of growth, they get left behind. And particularly in a country like India, which is very vast, and we have large number of villages, we have very huge disparity in education, in financial status. Usually you will find that while the GDP, the macro numbers will look very impressive, we become $3 trillion economy and we are growing and we are 6th largest economy in the world, etc. The truth is that sometimes there is this fear that a very large section of society may be left behind. And we're not just looking at them because the macro numbers are hiding their problems. So when you get schemes like Mudra, that is when we are underlying the fact that while we are growing at the top, it is a fact that the government is not ignoring the requirements of the large number of people who may be at the margins. And the idea is to lift those at the economic margins and integrate them into the mainstream. So that is what the scheme is all about. It is about integrating the informal economy into the formal sector. So how do we manufacture something in the villages and we are able to bring it to the cities either to sell or to integrate into larger economy. So that is what the whole scheme has been working upon. And I think among the main objectives which are laid out 8 years back by the Prime Minister, very substantial achievement has been made. Interestingly, you will see that while, of course, formally the loans under the scheme can be up to 10 lakhs, what we have seen is that 85% of loans were actually, 83% loans were actually below 50,000 rupees per entity. So actually the smaller entrepreneur or the smaller worker who has benefited from this scheme, 83% would be roughly, you can say, almost 20 lakh crore rupees would have been disbursed to people who have borrowed less than 50,000 rupees per person. So you can imagine the kind of people who have actually benefited from this scheme.
So I think what you are saying is about the Shishu, Kishore and Tarun categories under which these loans are dispersed. And also, Puneet, just for you to highlight about the financial inclusion that we were talking about, which stands on three pillars, primarily on banking the unbanked, securing the unsecured, and funding the unfunded. How are these three pillars taken care of in the scheme?
So, Rajesh, actually, if you see the way government laid out this whole digital payment environment, so we had on one account, we had Jan Dhan accounts, we've integrated those with mobiles and Aadhaar to create a digital payment ecosystem. Then reach, otherwise banks cannot open branches everywhere in the country. So the ability to reach financial products to people in villages and where no physical branches of institutions are there. So that was one important part. Second part was to integrate this digital system with the credit system, which is MUDRA basically. So MUDRA is entirely digital ecosystem where you can apply for loans online and you can get disbursements online and that money goes into your banks. So the borrower doesn't have to run around with physical documents, chasing bank officials or company officials. So that was the other major thing. And third leg of this grand strategy is the ONDC, where we are now creating an online marketplace for small businesses to sell their goods. And it will all be integrated. So the whole idea of financial inclusion is that we strengthen people's financial position by providing credit and ample liquidity when they need it. Then we enable them to generate an income where they live. So they don't have to run to cities. So wherever they live in villages or small towns, they can generate an income there. And whatever goods and services they produce can then be sold to other buyers, which is through the ONDC. So if you look at these three pillars, the UPI digital system, the MUDRA scheme and the ONDC, the online marketplace, then we see that financial inclusion, the ability to integrate persons sitting in the farthest villages into the economy, then that gets completed.
What about the youth? I mean, I'm sure the entrepreneurial or entrepreneurship among the new generation, aspiring youth is also taken care of in the scheme.
So, Rajesh, in fact, one of the issues with very populous countries like India has been that we have a very large number of young people coming into workforce every year, and the economy cannot generate enough jobs in the formal sector for this youth. And, it leads to other social problems. So we need to ensure that this large demographic dividend that we have, it gets deployed gainfully and in a productive manner. And only way to do it is to enable that youth to undertake their own business enterprise. We cannot provide formal jobs to everybody. Not the government can do it, nor the private sector or the corporates can do it. So ultimately, if we encourage the youth to go for their own employment and do their own businesses, then we can, of course, generate large amounts of employment. Now, to do that, always the biggest hurdle for promoting any business is availability of credit. Because how do you get a startup capital? A young person cannot get enough capital to start his own business. So MUDRA scheme, of course, comes in very handy. And again, I would say a very important thing in the scheme was that these are collateral-free loans. So a young person out of college, he has a business idea. Now, how does he get a collateral? How does he give it to the bank to raise credit? So the scheme has been designed to give collateral-free loans to youngsters, to entrepreneurs. And that's how I think it becomes a very effective scheme.
Very briefly on the rate of interest.
So government realized that, we cannot leave these small businesses to the vagaries of interest rate fluctuations. So although there is no mandated interest rates. So government leaves the interest rates to the disbursing institution, which is usually banks or MFIs or NBFCs. However, what government has done is that they have floated this MUDRA, which provides loans to these banks at low interest rates. So let's say a bank is disbursing 1,000 crores under MUDRA scheme, then that entire money gets refinanced by the government at very low rate. So the banks therefore can do it at very effective interest rate.
Puneet, we are sure that the Pradhan Mantri Mudra Yojana has given wings to the dreams and aspirations of millions, along with a feeling of self-worth and independence. On that note, thank you so very much for being with All India Radio.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion, 8 years of hassle-free credit access under PM MUDRA scheme. The participants were Puneet Jain, economic analyst, and Rajesh Lake, All India Radio correspondent. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on AIR Official. You may share your feedback about this program through email at airnsttalks@gmail.com